All right, YouTube. So for part 2 of this video, I wanted to go over some of my experiences with the reliability of each platform. With the Glock 35, I kind of went over a little bit before that it takes a little more spring pressure, in my opinion, if you're going to be shooting reasonably fast to be reliable. So I use a modified 33 round Glock spring, the 9mm 33 round Glock 18 mag. I cut a couple coils off of it. I stuff it into this, reshape the bottom, and then this becomes a very reliable magazine at 19 rounds, as fast as you can pull the trigger. Creates a lot of great spring pressure, so it's kind of hard to push that down. Works great. The other thing I do for the Glocks to make them more reliable, in my opinion, I would do a light polishing of the feed ramp, and that can be accomplished with maybe some sort of cloth and like flitz, some sort of polishing compound. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. If you use a Dremel, use the felt bit and a little bit of polish, and that should clean up the feed ramp plenty for feeding, for aid in feeding. The reason the polished feed ramp helps on the Glock, what ends up happening in competition is that we run a lighter recoil spring. So you can see there the metal guide rod, full length for a Glock 35, or it's an extended length, I guess, if you will, but it's full length for the longer barrel. So what we run in this 40, I run an 11-pound recoil spring. The factory recoil spring is somewhere around 17 or 18 pounds. So that makes it quite a bit lighter. And what happens is sometimes with a lot of spring pressure, say you got a weird bullet shape, sometimes you'll have a feeding issue since there's a reduced power from the spring to close the slide. So that helps out a lot, having the anything that aids in the slide closing. The other thing I'll do, which a lot of others do not agree with, which I really don't care what they think, I guess, is I will run grease on my frame rails. I will run a little bit of grease on the top of the barrel there, and anywhere there is contact or metal rubbing with each other, I'm going to run a little bit of grease. You can run automotive grease. White lithium will work fine. I also use a general gun oil lubrication. I kind of mix those together, and you kind of figure out what works. So I've noticed that if I just ran gun oil, that when you're at a high round count match or towards the end of the day, the final stages, that oil, especially in warm weather, will burn off of the gun, and then you essentially have a dry gun. So having that oil or having the grease, that aids in the gun's cycling and functioning over time. And I think it reduces wear and shock to the parts. I've seen a lot of people have issues with dry guns versus guns that were lubricated properly. And that's my experience. So we'll go on here. The other thing with the Glock, after about, we'll say, let's say 4,000 or 5,000 rounds, you want to go ahead and put a new extractor in. That's like a $10 part, maybe 20 bucks. So go ahead and buy you a new one. They're like, it takes 5 minutes to change those out. Super easy. Go ahead and get you a new extractor, put it in there, because you don't want to run into a stage where you're having empties getting stuck up in here, right? So those do wear out. Some Glock parts do wear out. Surprise, surprise. It's not, it might be the perfection of a handgun, but like anything else, things wear down over time. So that's my advice on reliability with those. So anyways, I'm going to close this slide up, drop the trigger here. So your 2011. With the 2011, some people say they need to be tuned. And I guess I'm of that opinion. And what I mean by that is they can be kind of finicky depending on how they're fit, how tight they're fit. Some gunsmiths who build 2011s build them very tight, and that's okay. Lends to great accuracy, precision instrument, etc., etc. However, with the brand new 2011, since they're kind of hand fitted, STI, I think are semi-hand fitted, so they're made in a small manufacturing facility. However, there is some hand fitting that goes on to building them. This DVC 2011 has served me very well. It's been a very reliable pistol for the most part. There are several things I have done to make it more reliable. I use I'll talk about the magazines first. I use the Atlas Gunworks videos to make sure that the magazine worked correctly and fed correctly. From the factory, the DVC or the STIs in general will come with a polished feed ramp. You can actually see that polished feed ramp there in the reflection. Sorry about the lighting. It's kind of hard to get everything in frame sometimes and focused. So, and I also generously lubricate this pistol. I used to run a lighter recoil spring. I think it was a 12 or a 10. And now I want to say these are 14-pound recoil springs that I run. It's a little heavier. It does increase a little muzzle flip. However, the gun seems to be more reliable with the 14-pounder. Okay. So there you kind of get an idea. The other thing I had to do over a certain amount of rounds, and it actually did help with the reliability, was not only did I tune the extractor in, I beveled the bottom of the extractor so it fed the case of the round up into the breech face a little more reliably, more easier. Essentially, it wasn't getting caught. There wasn't any rough edges. That can be accomplished with some jeweler files and some knowledge. Read up on it. Or if you don't want to do that, have a gunsmith who knows 1911s or 2011s. Have them check it out. And it helps if the gunsmith knows shooting, not just guns. So if they understand competition shooting, you're better off than one that does not. So anyhow, so there's the 2011 reliability. Like I said, the biggest thing for this gun for the 2011 was getting that extractor and kind of picking the right recoil spring. The other thing, obviously, is the magazines, as we touched on earlier. Getting those set up correctly is a big deal. As far as lubrication goes on the 2011, it mirrors essentially what I do with my Glocks. I use some white lithium grease on the frame rails. I use grease in other places where there is going to be metal parts rubbing together. Some 2011 aficionados will say grease is terrible, it ruins the gun, etc., etc., etc. This gun has 4,000 rounds through it. I clean it about every 2 or 3 matches. I will, and I also use some oil. I use gun oil, like your general gun lube or rem oil, in addition to that grease. I tried, upon advice of these experts out there on the internet, saying that just use gun oil and that's enough and that's all you want. And my gun malfunctioned at those matches. I went back to a dutiful amount of grease in certain areas, like your frame rails, you know, maybe the top of the hammer, any parts that slide or rub, just a little dab there. And that kept the gun a lot more reliable. Like I said, I use oil as well. For your trigger group probably needs oil more than anything. Okay, so everything's running correctly. This gun is still tight like the day it was bought. Okay, this gun has about 4,000 rounds through it, probably about 30 matches in it, and it still runs perfect. So pretty happy with the STI. A lot of people dog the STIs, but for my experience so far, it's been a great pistol. It runs good. I don't have any issues with it. So that's that. Okay, and so now let's go on to part 3.